Welcome to the second edition of the King of Cool podcast, and let's just get this out of the way sooner rather than later. This is definitely going to be fun with the roster of so many interesting people that I've lined up to recount not only my personal history, but more importantly, the history of cool clothing from the 20th century through this first bit of the 21st century. The stories are an important part of the oral history, which has never been told from this perspective, that of a retailer and a wholesaler. I'm just the conduit of my generation, and eventually, once this story is fully told, our love for our country and our perspective on how we were the disruptors and actually changed the rules and changed the culture. This is not hyperbole, but in actuality, it is the truth. So let me share some thoughts before we start on this journey. I was sent this by a dear friend, and although I did not write it, which my dear business partner Matilda thought I did, but I have to come clean, no, I didn't. So I'm going to read this since I didn't memorize it, so if my eyes stray, don't be distracted. We are often called the elderly, but that quiet label hides the truth most people rarely pause to consider. We are the last living witnesses of a world that no longer exists. If you look closely, you might notice gray hair, slower steps, or the quiet patience that only time can teach. But if you truly listen to our stories, you will discover something far more extraordinary. We are not simply older people moving through the final chapters of life. We are the survivors of one of the most breathtaking transformations in human history, a generation that walked from the slow, deliberate rhythms of an analog world into the dazzling speed of a digital one without ever losing our sense of humanity along the way. Our journey began in a very different place. Many of us were born in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s, when the scars of World War II were still fresh across Europe and Asia, and the world was slowly learning how to hope again. Cities rose from the rubble. Families rebuilt lives after years of uncertainty. Childhood unfolded in ways that would feel almost unrecognizable to the younger generation today. Our toys were simple. Marbles played in dusty yards. Hopscotch drawn on cracked sidewalks, checkers and cards gathered around kitchen tables while the smell of dinner filled the house. When the streetlights flickered on in the evening, it was the universal signal that childhood adventures were over for the day and it was time to go home. There were no smartphones, no streaming videos, no endless scrolls of digital distractions. Instead, we built our memories in the real world with scraped knees, laughter echoing down neighborhood streets, and friendships that formed face to face without the mediation of screens. Music became one of the defining soundtracks of our youth. The 60s and the 70s arrived like a wave of color and rebellion. We watched culture shift around us, carried by electric guitars and voices that dared to question the world. For many of us, including me, gatherings like the legendary Woodstock Festival of 1969 symbolized something powerful, the belief that peace, music, and community could reshape the future. Hundreds of thousands of young people stood together in muddy fields, listening to artists who poured raw emotion into towering speakers known as the Wall of Sound. That was not merely entertainment. That was a moment in time when strangers felt like a single generation singing the same hope under an open sky. Education looked different then, too. Our notebooks were filled with handwritten notes, carefully copied from chalkboards. Research required patience, long hours in libraries, and stacks of heavy books, rather than a quick internet search. We learned to slow down and think through ideas because information did not arrive instantly. Mistakes were corrected with erasers and ink, not with the click of a delete button. Love carried a different rhythm as well. We fell in love with vinyl records, spun on turntables and cassette tapes, clicked softly inside plastic players. Music became the background to first dances, long conversations, and dreams about the future. Those relationships grew into marriages, families, and lives built step by step through the 80s and 90s. Decades that saw technology begin to reshape the world around us. Yet nothing compares to the bridge our generation has crossed. We are the only generation to have experienced an entirely analog childhood and a fully digital adulthood. We remember waiting days or sometimes weeks for handwritten letters to arrive in the mail. We remember rotary phones and party lines where neighbors could accidentally overhear conversations. Communication required patience and anticipation. Today, we can see the face of a loved one across the ocean instantly on a screen small enough to fit in a pocket. The world changed in ways few could have imagined. We watched humanity land on the moon in 1969, a moment when millions of people sat in their living rooms staring at a black and white television as Neil Armstrong took humanity's first steps onto another world. We saw the rise of personal computers, the birth of the internet, and eventually the arrival of smartphones that placed entire libraries of knowledge in our hands. Machines that once filled entire rooms now exists on devices lighter than a paperback book. We moved from punch cards and mechanical tools to artificial intelligence and global networks connecting billions of people instantly. And through every shift, we adapted. Our bodies carry the marks of the times we lived through as well. We grew up during fears of polio and tuberculosis, illnesses that once terrified entire communities before vaccines helped bring them under control. We witnessed the global challenges of pandemics and health crises across decades, including the recent silence and uncertainty of COVID-19, which reminded the world that resilience is still required in every generation. Science itself transformed before our eyes. We saw the discovery of the structure of DNA in 1953, the decoding of human genome at the turn of the century, and the early steps into gene therapy and advanced medicine. Transportation evolved from simple bicycles and steam engines to hybrid vehicles and electric cars, almost silently running through streets. Few generations have witnessed such sweeping change, and yet, despite everything that evolved around us, certain things remain unchanged. We still understand the joy of a cold glass bottle of lemonade on a hot afternoon. We still remember the taste of vegetables picked straight from a garden. We still know the value of a long conversation that unfolds slowly without a keyboard or screen interrupting it. Our memories stretch across decades. We have celebrated births, mourned losses, watched friends depart, and carried their stories forward. Those of us who remain share something rare, the experience of standing at the crossroads of history, hiding memories from a world that younger generations know only through photographs and stories. But we are not relics. We are living bridges. Our perspective reminds the modern world that progress does not have to erase wisdom. The speed of technology does not have to replace patience, kindness, or reflection. We remember what life felt like before everything moved so fast, and that memory carries quiet lessons worth sharing. So, when someone calls us elderly, we can smile, because behind that word lies something extraordinary. We are the generation that crossed 2 centuries, witnessed 8 decades of transformation, and walked from the age of handwritten letters to the era of artificial intelligence. What a life we have lived. What a remarkable story we continue to carry. And if you belong to this generation like I do, take a moment today to look in the mirror and recognize something powerful. You are not simply growing older. You are living history. You are part of a generation that will always remain one of a kind. And perhaps, in the quietest and most meaningful way, you and I are becoming legendary. So every week, I'm going to list 5 people, places, or things that I consider cool. And of course, I will always, always, always wait for you to at least remind me of things that you consider cool and that I should put on the list on a weekly basis. So let's go. Number 1, Taylor Sheridan. If you don't know who Taylor Sheridan is, then you've never watched Yellowstone, Landman, 1883, 1923, The Madison, Lioness, Tulsa King, The Mayor of Kingstown, Marshalls, or Dutton Ranch. Taylor Sheridan is a genius. His television shows, which are streaming on Paramount Plus, why am I even giving them a plug, are phenomenal. Number 2, Bruce Springsteen. Come on. Greetings from Asbury Park in 1973 was one of the greatest albums ever released, and it changed my life. His live performances are basically a religious experience, and here I'm quoting Bruce because his shows are a rock and roll baptism and a rock and roll exorcism. It's a religious experience. Did I say that already? Here's a man who played 4-hour concerts. And today, at age 76, he's slowed down a little, so the concerts are sometimes 3 hours. Now, there's no opening act. He has the energy of James Brown, the Rolling Stones, Bob Marley and the Wailers, and Elvis Presley, all wrapped into one human being. Bruce Springsteen is cool. Number 3, Ralph Lauren. Yes, the GOAT of American designers, who has never really lost his sense of what Americans want to wear. From his vintage-inspired RRL line, which is by far the coolest stuff that he makes, to his iconic polo shirts, Ralph Lipschitz, his real name, has never forgotten how Americans want to dress in a certain style. Since 1967, when he made his ties, he actually competed with my neighbor across the street, Vicki Davis, who was also making ties. Until today, 2026, and Ralph, on his couture collection for next spring, did patchwork jeans. Thanks, Ralph, for giving me a little bit of credit. Number 4, Linda Dresner. One of the coolest women in the business that I had the pleasure to know and call a friend. Linda operated the best stores in Detroit and in New York, where in 1984 through 2008, she was on Park Avenue, having one of the great stores that Jackie Onassis would come and shop in and hang out and have lunch with Linda. And Linda also opened the first Jill Sanders store in the United States. Linda was a pioneer. I mean, she brought Comme des Garçons, Yohji Yamamoto, Dries Van Noten, Martin Margiela, and my friend Gregory Parkinson to the homes and closets of the best-dressed women in America. Number 5, Super Vinyl Record Store. Located in West Hollywood on Sycamore, owned by my friend Barry Perlman, who was one of the co-founders of Lucky Jeans. This record store in a digital world is completely vinyl. No CDs, no cassettes, only records. He opened the store in 2019, and to this day, it is one of the coolest spots in Los Angeles. They do in-store promotions with artists. They have enormous windows with the record covers on the window. And he's had in-stores with Charlie XCX and Beyonce. So Super Vinyl is cool. First and foremost, I have always been a merchant. I'm the guy who has the eye for what is cool and what continues to be cool, what is actually timeless. That's always been my secret weapon. I've always been able to know who my customer is, what the customer wants, be it on a retail or wholesale level, what makes the customer react to something, be it color, be it style, be it a small detail. It's not necessarily because it's different, although yes, it usually is, but because it looks beautiful on the body. And when a man or a woman puts on the clothing, they feel confident. They feel like they are the best version of themselves. And in order to be a retailer or a wholesaler, you have to have that merchant mentality. What is going to make the customer happy? And what is going to bring the customer joy? And what is going to make them look in the mirror and go, damn, I look good. How did I really get started on this journey? I'll never forget the day. It was, I believe, in 1955, and I was going to Pepper Elementary School. So, pretty sure I was in first grade. And in walked Ricky Selleck. Ricky Selleck was one of my dear friends. I would still consider him a friend today. And Ricky had on a short sleeve lime green shirt with matching shorts. Yeah, I know. That is my first memory of what I thought was cool. And I came home, I'll never forget, I said to my mom, Ricky had on this amazing outfit. And she said, oh, he probably got it at Small Fry Fashions on Coolidge in Oak Park. But it was probably a little expensive. So when you get older, you're going to probably have to get a job if you're going to want to afford to look nice and have clothes that are a little bit more expensive. But it stuck with me. It did. And I've never forgotten it. And Ricky, shout out to you. So my first job in the clothing business was in 1963 at the Clothes Rack on the corner of 10 Mile Road and Coolidge in Oak Park in the Dexter Davison Shopping Plaza. Joe and Eleanor Dorfman took a chance on a young kid who wanted to work in a clothing store. And how did I start? Folding pants, keeping everything neat, marking in the merchandise, doing all the grunt work, until I eventually graduated into selling clothes to people my age, which eventually turned into not selling them Robert Bruce wool Shetland sweaters anymore, and the brand was HIS, and the pants were Blades, which were skinny pants. But I had a revelation. I said, listen, people my age don't want to wear those anymore. We want to wear flares. We want to wear bell bottoms. That's what's next. And sure enough, we bought those clothes and the business continued to do well. And I worked there till about 1971 when I graduated from college, at which point I was going to teach school. Unfortunately, they didn't need school teachers anymore. So a friend of mine who had sold us bell bottoms, he was the sales rep for male jeans, his name was Stan Sukan, said, you know, I know some people that are going to open a store in Adrian, Michigan, and they have plans for more. Would you be interested? I said, not at all. So he called me back the next week. He said, come on, just sit down and meet with them. So I sat down with Sid Moss, who has become a lifelong friend of mine, and he had partners, Fred Band and Al Margolis, who were in the drugstore business. Now, these guys do nothing about the clothing business. Sid had great taste and hired me to manage the store in Mount Clemens. And sure enough, after a year, I said, listen, and as he was expanding, he said, how would you like to be the buyer and come to New York with me? I said, sure, that would be great. So I ended up buying for the 6 stores that we had in Michigan, and then we opened at least 10 or 15 $5 stores in, yes, you heard me, $5 pants stores in the 1970s in Ohio. I had nothing to do with them because all we were doing was buying manufacturers' closeouts, things they couldn't sell, and we turned around, bought them for $2, sold them for $5. I wanted nothing to do with it. So as it progressed, I wrote them a beautiful business plan of how I thought they should expand. Well, as it happens, they rejected my idea. I was a little hurt, but I was like, okay. And about 2 months later, Larry Sherman, who owned Sherman Shoes in Birmingham, Michigan, knew that I was looking to do something, and he said there was going to be a store vacant on West Maple Road. Now, West Maple Road in Birmingham, Michigan was like the spot. And Birmingham was a very, very, very conservative community, very white bread. So I saw that there was a need to spice it up a little bit. So we took the space. My best friend, Randy Joseph, his parents, Chuck and Dorothy Joseph, were the early investors, and we opened up Mark Keller. Now, side note, I was going to call the store Casablanca. My dear friend, Alan Sussman, who has one of the greatest advertising minds in the country, laughed at me. He said, you're not calling it Casablanca. What are you going to have? Posters of Marlon Brando? No, sorry. He said, what are you going to have? Posters of Humphrey Bogart? He said, use your name. And at the time, which is a little bit still in the back of my mind, I was a little reticent to use my name. Sort of like I was reticent to call this the King of Cool. But Alan Sussman was right. Mark Keller opened on September 25th, 1975. And why do I remember that date? Because on my birthday, which I was going to open the store, Bruce Springsteen was playing in Ann Arbor for the first time in Michigan. So we had to delay the opening. We had a nice grand opening. Dick Purton, one of the legends of Detroit radio, came to the grand opening. He was friends with Chuck and Dorothy. And the store was an instant success, 1,000 square feet. And after a couple years, I said, you know what? There's way more clothes that I can buy. So we took another space across the street, called it West End, opened that in, I think it was 1978, and we operated it till 1983. And that was the streetwear store. We carried Gerbeau. We had a denim bar. We carried Bluefish, Bronx, Maurice Sassoon, Sutter's, Stussy, Kick It, Inwear and Matinique, 26 Red and Massimo. I mean, the store was off the hook. I had the best people working for me. And we'll get to that in a minute, because without the people that worked for me, the store would not have been successful. I had great taste, and I also was smart enough to hire the best people. I can say that I've learned more from my mistakes than I have from my successes. This, of course, for those who have not watched Dutton Ranch, which was a line which Rip spoke to his adopted son Carter about. You learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And boy, did I make a mistake. I decided that I would expand my empire to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And in 1981, I opened a store with Tommy Shea, who had Kenneth Cole shoes, and Lisa Parks, who had beautiful hand-knit sweaters. We opened up on the corner of Liberty and Thompson, and it was a disaster. We opened the day the stock market crashed, which should have told me something at the time, but I never should have done it. And I learned a valuable lesson, and I got smarter. So I think we closed the store in 1982, and then in 1983 or 84, I opened up Basic Goods in my original location in Birmingham with John and Nancy Levy, who were the financial partners. And the store was a huge, instant success. Again, we had a beautiful looking store. Ron Ray designed the store, and he designed all my stores. And it had an old-fashioned feel to it. And we did unbelievable business. Probably the biggest seller, which at the time I thought was crazy when I bought it, Dina and Puna Mohajer, who were customers of mine, called me one day and said, listen, we're making nail polish. And we sold it to Fred Siegel in Los Angeles. Would you carry it? I said, of course. I cannot tell you how many bottles of nail polish we sold. And the colors that they were making at the time had never been done before. Pinks and purples and turquoise, reds, lavenders. It was wild. I had no idea. So again, taking that chance to find something new worked. And I brought in this beautiful line of clothing from France called Lilith, which had nothing really to do with the store, but the clothes were gorgeous. And it got to a point where on my days off, I was working with the company, helping them with their distribution in America since they didn't have a salesperson here. And John and I, got to a point where he said, well, you can either do one or the other, and I chose to continue with Lilith. So I left Basic Goods, and we opened up a Lilith store in an old horse barn in an alley in Birmingham. And from 1995 to 2000, we operated the only Lilith store in America at the time. There was another one that opened in San Francisco. And it was fabulous. The clothes were beautiful. Lily, who designed it, was unbelievably talented. Terry Morrow worked with me there up until, I opened up the MATTHILDUR by Mark Keller store. And she was always right there beside me offering, her expertise, having worked at Barney's and Neiman Marcus. and we had an unbelievably great business. At the time that I was distributing Lilith, I did it with friends of mine from Seattle, Uri and Baby Burstein, who owned Baby and Company. And we were very successful until one season the clothes didn't fit, which is a big problem. So that sort of ended that relationship. And I started doing trunk shows with this little company that I discovered in New York called Elm Design. Now, Elm Design was an Icelandic clothing company that was manufacturing in Peru. And Elm stood for Ernestina, Lisbeth, and Matildur. And when they started, all they made were sweaters. And that's what I bought for the store. And I'll never forget being at their booth in the Chelsea market and seeing this huge poster that they had of Iceland. One of the landscape in Iceland is just unbelievable. So I stopped and talked to them, bought the sweaters, and sold out of them. Came back next season. I said, how you guys doing? Well, we still are selling to the same few stores that we sold to, because they knew nothing about sales in America. So I'll never forget, we sat down in Tribeca, right across from Bubby's and across from the Yoji store. No, Izzy Miyake store. And it was February, and it was 72 degrees in New York. We shook hands, and I said, all right, I'll get you into the best clothing show, which was the Coterie at the Javits Center. I said, but you've got to do more than just sweaters, so use some Pima cotton lycra. So they came up with a collection, got them into the Coterie that my friend owned, and the best she could do, she said, was putting us near the cafeteria. Well, I opened up 45 accounts. They thought I was a genius, which at the time I may have been. And the company just took off, and I spent 10 years going to Iceland twice a year, which was unbelievably beautiful, and it was a great experience. And then during 2008, when the country of Iceland went bankrupt, the E and the L sort of weren't really keen on designing as much, and Matildur went out on her own, and that's how Matildur was born, by the demise of Elm. So I was doing trunk shows at the Townsend Hotel for a couple years, and then opened up upstairs at Linda Dresner's store. For 10 years, we did Elm and Matildur store up there, and we were pretty successful. And I got a better offer from a friend of mine who had a artist studio, Laurie Tennant. So we moved to Eaton Street, where we only opened the store on weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And that worked for about 6 years until my best friend, Rob Wolk, who owned Sundance Shoes, said to me, there's going to be a space available next door to me. Called my friend Ted Fuller, who owns a lot of property in Birmingham, and I've known him for 50 years. We worked out a deal on the lease, favorable, I might add, because Ted's a great guy. And that's how Matildur by Mark Keller came to be. So that brings you up to where I am as a retailer. As times changed, so did the retail landscape. Stores were closing. The internet truly started to change the way business was done. And big brands were opening up their own stores. So it became a question of how do I continue, and can I do both? Can I be a retailer and a wholesaler? Why not? It's a brilliant idea. And having made the mistakes that I've made in the past, this to me was the true path of how to be profitable and successful, in addition to the fact that I still get to be on the floor listening to customers tell me what they like and what they don't like. And as a wholesaler, as a manufacturer, it's very important to listen to the customer. A retailer has to listen to the customer. The wholesaler usually doesn't have that benefit until they're selling to the stores. And then all they're listening to is what the retailer is telling them. So for me, it was, easy, the transition, to do both. We were early adapters as far as, selling online, which, is a third part of the business. And it didn't take away from our wholesale accounts, because the really good ones also sell online. And the prices are the same. Some of the stores sell for less at times, but it doesn't matter. But the key is, I've always loved product, which goes back to being a merchant, which is the key to being successful. If you don't have a love for product and all you're doing is looking at numbers and being a bean counter, it doesn't really work, because there's no soul. And that is the key, I think, to having my hands and feet in both parts of the business. I listen, I learn, and with that knowledge, I become a better merchant, and for sure, a better person. Now, if I didn't listen to the customer, be it in the retail store or at a clothing show, listening to the retailers, I'd be a fool. There's so much information to be gained that many, many, many companies never take the time to listen to, because they always think they're right. And they may be. But listening to the needs and the wants of your customer is all that really matters. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to be seen. And it's a catchphrase that we use in our branding, but it's true. Because when you walk out the door, you've got clothes on, and you damn well better look good. There's nothing better than a customer telling me, I can't believe I've gotten so many compliments. Because our generation is, at times, invisible to others. But not if you have the right clothes on, you're not. Or I always hear, but I have nowhere to go, which is one of my favorite sayings in the 21st century. In the 20th century, it was, does this make me look fat? In the 21st century, it's, I have nowhere to go. And my response is always the same. You walk out your front door, you're going somewhere. I don't care if you're going to the supermarket. I don't care if you're going to lunch. I don't care if you're going to yoga class or Pilates, whichever. You have to look good, and you have to be seen. You can't be invisible. So yes, that's why I love what I'm doing, because I make people look great and feel great. And that's the joy of being in this business. So at the end of each episode, as we'll call this an episode, I will bring to you the King of Cool Song of the Week. Now, we can't play the song. So if you have Spotify or Apple Music or Pandora or however you listen to you, or you could buy the record at Super Vinyl. And this week, the song is A Long Walk Home by Bruce Springsteen, dedicated to my dear friend Matt Lee. The reason for that song is there's a line in it, which I'm not going to be able to remember verbatim, that Matt would always say to me. There's words that are written on the courthouse in stone of who we are and what we do. And it always brings chills when I hear the song, but now even more so. So I hope you enjoy it. That concludes this thing we call a podcast. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. So I'll see you next time. Please leave comments. I love reading them. Speaking of comments, here's one I received from a dear friend of mine, Linda Cohn, whose husband Spencer and her owned a store in New York called Coda on Long Island, in Great Neck, actually, I believe. And here's what she sent to me. I love the podcast. Listened to it going upstate New York. I felt like I was there, remembering all those times, buying those lines, the discoveries, going to Paris, Milan, back to London to see Gabby at Catherine Hamnet, and a special trip to Japan. The magical years of Gerbeau and Kick It, and the sweaters that I wore through my pregnancy, and Ghost and Tanya. Oh my God, remembering all of it. When you mentioned Stephen Sprouse, I got stuck with orange sweaters. We need storytellers. Keep it going. It's great. So, if you are so inspired, send me a message. This episode was brought to you by the MATTHILDUR by Mark Keller flagship store in downtown Birmingham at 227 South Old Woodward. Ask for Mark, ask for Izzy, ask for Lucy, or ask for Camille. We will see you next time as we slowly but surely walk down this road we call life.